This episode of The Holy Post is sponsored by our friends at World Relief, the Christian humanitarian organization we trust to tackle the world's greatest challenges. Did you know that every month nearly 10,000 people ask search engines like Google, "What is a refugee?" And while that's an important question, World Relief invites us to look beyond the label to understand the person, their story, and their God-given dignity. If you've ever wondered what life is really like for someone forced to flee their home, visit worldrelief.org/whatisarefugee. You'll find answers to your questions, hear real stories of people who were forced to flee their homes, and experience the Seeking Refugee Simulation, a powerful and immersive audio experience where you'll walk through the decisions and challenges refugees face every day. And as you learn, you'll also discover how you can make a difference by faithfully partnering with World Relief to provide hope, support, and a path forward for families in crisis. Visit worldrelief.org/holypost to take the first step. That's worldrelief.org/holypost. Hi there. Welcome back to the Holy Post podcast. I'm Phil Vischer. I am here today. I got Skye Jatani down at the other end of the desk. Hi, Skye.
Hi, Phil.
And in the middle, in between Skye and I, in person, live, for your listening enjoyment and or viewing is Kaitlyn Chess. Hi, Kaitlyn.
Hi, Phil.
You're in Wheaton today.
Yes, today.
So fantastic.
Yeah.
What brings you to Wheaton?
Just fun.
Just fun.
Hanging
It's
out.
just fun to hang out with us.
Fun. I missed you.
Because over the
Skye, I missed you.
You're going to spend the weekend at my house.
Exactly. I'm so excited to hang out with you and Lisa.
Take care of my grandkids.
Are you actually staying at his place?
Fun.
No.
Okay. Well, I mean, you have a pool. I thought maybe...
and it's 50 degrees.
That's true.
So that's fun.
That's why I came to hang out with Phil.
It's like a resort.
It's like a resort.
Same.
Hey, special day. We're doing a mailbag today because we're recording early because next week's a holiday, so we're off on Monday. So, we won't know what's happened over the weekend. We don't have any news to talk about because we just recorded a few days ago. So we're doing a mailbag. So you sent us lots of questions, and we're going to answer some of them.
Because there were a lot.
There were a lot.
And some of them were long.
Yeah, I know. If it's like a 300-word question, it's a pretty good chance we're not going to get to it. So, for future reference, keep that in mind. Short and succinct often wins the day. And now it's time for the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post.
And sometimes Kaitlyn.
This episode of The Holy Post is sponsored by Hiya Health. Hey, do you have kids? Do you care about their health? Of course you do. Most kids' vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk kids really shouldn't be eating. That's why Hiya was created, the pediatrician-approved, super-powered, chewable vitamin for kids. 0 sugar, 0 gummy junk, yet they taste great and are perfect for picky eaters. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. And we've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you need to go to hiyahealth.com/holypost. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/holypost and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. And thanks to Hiya Health for sponsoring this episode. Today's episode is sponsored by Sunday's Food for Dogs. We love our dog. Her name is Keena. We love to give her belly rubs. And she loves to patrol our backyard to make sure no squirrels break into our house to steal our valuables. We also love to give her Sunday's Food for Dogs. It's fresh, healthy dog food that's easy to store and serve. Most dog food is one or the other, either fresh and healthy or easy to store and serve. Because Sunday's is air-dried, it doesn't require refrigeration or prep. It comes right to our door so we never run out. And it's healthy food. Human-grade ingredients, 90% meat, 10% superfoods, 0% anything else. Folks who've switched their dogs to Sundays notice health improvements like softer fur, fresher breath, and more energy. Keena loves Sunday's Food for Dogs, and we love that it keeps her healthy and strong so she can keep the squirrels from taking our stuff. Give it a try. Right now, you can get 40% off your first order of Sundays. Go to sundaysfordogs.com/holypost or use code holypost at checkout for 40% off your first order. First question. I'm going to jump right into it.
I think that's what we should do.
Actually, I'm not. I'm not going to jump into it because someone sent something in that I thought, based on last week's podcast, that I thought was interesting. We got a letter from someone after listening to last week's podcast because we were talking about Shane Claiborne getting arrested in the Capitol.
Right.
And what was he doing in the Rotunda? Why would he get arrested? That's ridiculous.
He was what was the word?
Commoding.
He was commoding.
Incommoding.
Someone wrote in and said, I want to help you understand why so many demonstrators are arrested inside the Capitol. Our daughter has been a U.S. Capitol tour guide for years. Who would know
Thank
better?
you for your service.
Yeah, amen.
It's actually illegal to demonstrate anywhere inside the Capitol building. Some areas on the grounds allow it if you have a permit. I don't know why they use such weird reasons for the arrest on the official statement, but the Rotunda is not somewhere the public may roam freely. You must be accompanied by a tour guide, which is why it's a ridiculous claim that the January 6th participants just wanted to walk around and see the Capitol. Everywhere they went is off limits unless you are with a tour guide. But I agree with the stark contrast between peaceful anti-MAGA protesters and the January 6th insurrection. So if you're in there without a tour guide, you're already breaking the rules.
Okay.
That's helpful.
I'm sure they knew that when they
Right.
went in. And,
Shane Claiborne, if you're listening, the next time you want to do that, hint, hint, get a tour guide who will help you. And then, or just stand near a tour guide. And then you can probably.
Or just take a tour, but when you get to the Rotunda,
pray loudly.
Drop to your knees and
pray
for Palestine or whatever it was he was doing.
Poverty.
Oh, it was the bill.
It was the bill.
The budget.
The budget.
It was the bill. Okay. Question number 1. This is from Mike. When is Skye going to write his next book?
Funny you should ask.
This feels like a setup. So
it's funny that our producer's name is Mike.
Yeah,
It's
that's
almost like he sent a question.
That's
Could be.
Yeah, in fact, the next 10 questions are all from Mike. What does that even mean?
Hey, this is a setup because we are announcing our next big new project at Holy Post Plus is my new book. So I think by the time this comes out, it'll be out for a few days now, but here's how it's going to work. My new book is called The World Born in You, and the subtitle is Letters to a New Generation of American Christians.
Ooh.
And we are releasing it exclusively for Holy Post Plus subscribers, and I'm writing it. It's not actually written yet. I am currently writing it.
Can we all write it together?
Oh.
Kind of.
Let's make it like a Google Doc that all Patreon subscribers
They can each write a sentence.
can edit.
Oh, see, these are ideas we should not be recording, Phil, because now you're raising people's expectations a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
Now, here's how it's going to work. I'm writing it as a serial. So we're going to release one chapter a month starting in June through the end of the year. And the introduction is done. That's already been posted. The introduction is available for free for anyone. You don't have to be a Holy Post Plus subscriber. You can go to theworldborninyou.com and read that introduction. But it will be available for the $10 tier or higher Holy Post Plus subscribers. But along with getting a chapter every month of this new book, you will also get related devotionals, sermon videos related to the chapters I'm writing. And every month I'm going to do a live stream with you all so that we can interact about that month's chapter as I'm in the process of writing the next chapter. But here's the thing. The people are asking, what is the book about? Because that's kind of a weird title.
Yeah. Hey, Skye.
Yeah.
What's the book about?
So I have been thinking about and noodling on this book idea since 2019. I actually went back and looked at my notes. I started writing the first draft of this when I was in Hawaii in November of 2019. And it was originally going to be a book about what does it mean to live as a Christian in today's kind of really crazy American context. But if you remember November 2019, things changed a lot in the next couple of months because we hit the pandemic and then the George Floyd stuff that summer. And I realized, I don't know what's happening in America. So I'm just going to put this idea on the shelf. And I wrote the 5 What If Jesus Was Serious books. And now I'm coming back to it. So the book is it's 7 chapters, each one focusing on a different virtue or value that I think we need to exhibit if we're going to navigate this current moment in this post-American culture, this very diverse culture. But what's changed from my original idea 6 years ago is I'm writing the book as a series of 7 letters to my young adult children. So it also includes a lot of my own faith formation and story and things that shaped how I think about following Jesus in today's world. And so that's how I'm writing this book.
I love that.
Could your next book be a series of letters written to me?
Yeah, we're going to call it Rotten Tomato. No, this is a very vulnerable book in some ways. So I've not done this before. It's more personal, but I hope it's not just like, I get a glimpse into what Skye's telling his kids. It's not about parenting.
It's your parenting book.
It's not a parenting book. No. It's not parenting at all. It's meant to be something sincere I'm writing to my adult kids, but it's really for all of us as we think through what does it mean to live as a Christian in this moment, in these complicated times. Woven through it is also the story of Naaman from 2 Kings 5, which I've spent years kind of writing and focusing on. So anyway, that's the big new thing on Holy Post Plus. We're offering a 20% discount right now for new and returning subscribers.
You should join finally.
Yeah. You got to use the promo code BOOK. Hopefully you can spell that. Is it all caps? Does it need to be caps or does it matter? I don't know. But it's the word book is the promo code. And you get 20% off. So if you're not a Holy Post Plus subscriber and you want to be part of this journey with me as I write this book and get access to all the content, go to holypost.com, use the promo code BOOK.
Fantastic.
Wow.
I think we can probably wrap it up right now. That's really, this whole thing was just a setup.
No.
Just a big ad.
All right, Kaitlyn, pick a question.
Okay. I picked this question from Logan, who says, should more lay people go to seminary? I am a CPA that has not had a calling to go into any form of structured leadership and ministry. However, I'm deeply interested in biblical scholarship and theology and love learning. I know I would enjoy seminary, but a part of me feels that since I have no thoughts or plans for formal ministry, my time is best used reading and studying in a manner that everyone else that I do in life can as well, being specifically outside of a seminary. So,
okay.
Should Logan go to seminary?
Oh, everyone should go to seminary.
Part of this question, the fact that he has to ask this question, it grieves me a little bit.
Yes.
Because the church should be the place where we learn doctrine and we learn scripture and we learn theology. And if people are hungry for a deeper understanding of these things, the church should be where that's happening. And sadly, that's pretty rare. And I've talked to a lot of people who are not in vocational ministry, who are in other really meaningful callings, who go to seminary because they simply want to learn the faith. And I mean, you shouldn't have to spend $50,000 or $100,000 at seminary to learn the faith.
The Bible Project can do it for free.
Well, actually, the Bible Project is a great resource for a lot of people. I don't want to say
but I appreciate this question not only for the point you're making, Skye, but also for someone recognizing just because I have access to so many resources doesn't mean, I can just Google and read whatever books I find and do. Because I do think part of the problem, to your point about the church not providing this, is that some churches sort of act like it's out there. Like I've literally been in a church where someone was encouraging women to study theology, which I so appreciate and love. But her point was basically like, because of the internet, just Google your questions and you'll figure it out. And the value of seminary is the curation and the ability to have really educated people help you make decisions about what kinds of things matter and what to read and what to ignore. And so I want to affirm both the you're probably not getting it in your church and that's heartbreaking. And I love that you're not going, I'll just Google it on my own.
Well, in between those two things though, and I've written about this when I was making my arguments about moving beyond a sermon-centric Sunday, that part of the role I think for church leaders is curating resources. I think some pastors are under the illusion they might spend 20 or 30 hours a week crafting their sermon. They're under the illusion that sermon is shaping everyone's theology, and they're ignorant to the fact that the people who are engaging in theological stuff are just Googling and searching, and God knows where they land. So part of our responsibility, if you're a church leader these days, is actually to curate really good resources for your people, to say to them, hey, if you are curious about theology, doctrine, this particular, here's a good resource or YouTube channel or website or book that you should be that's what our churches ought to be doing, and its informed leaders ought to be doing, so that people aren't left to their own devices on Google, and they don't have to spend $100,000 to go to seminary to learn this stuff.
And there are some churches doing, I just was speaking in the cohort that our friend Glenn Packiam, his church does this. I know a bunch of other churches that are doing this right now, where they're basically making like a lay seminary where you have to kind of commit to a certain amount of time and study, and you read books. And I love that, not only because that should be happening in the church, but also because there are often really well-educated, thoughtful people in churches that are not in full-time ministry that could be, brought into that to like teach certain things. I'm thinking of like PhD students or seminary students who like could get really valuable experience teaching because they don't just have the option of like, I'm serving in this capacity in the church where I'm not using that education, or I have to have my full-time job be this. It's like there's other avenues that are created for those people too, which is really cool. I'm glad people are doing that.
So the answer is what? He's looking for an answer. Should he go to seminary?
Logan, what should he do? I think it depends on your context, Logan. Like if you have the means and the time and the interest, I wouldn't say don't do it.
Right.
But it agrees me that it seems like you feel that's your only option.
And maybe this is a good push for Logan and other people who are listening and relate to that question to say, maybe this could actually happen in my church, and it needs a really passionate, engaged layperson to like do some organizing or, rally some people together. Like maybe there's an opportunity for you to create the thing that you're looking for. And that could be a real gift to your church too.
Okay, there you go. Logan, moving on. I get to ask a question now. You did one. You did one. Actually, I asked you.
Yeah, I was
going to say. But it was a setup. So,
it was a setup. Setup. Rachel, what do you think of the very evangelical phrase, I accepted Jesus into my heart? Is it an accurate articulation of what happens? Is it appropriate to use this phrase as a cornerstone of our children's programs? I got some feelings about that.
Yeah.
I assume you all do as well.
Go for it, Phil.
For kids, there's a couple big issues. Number one, young kids are very literal, and it is a very confusing statement to give a totally literal kid that can't think abstractly. If they can think abstractly, it's still a little confusing because I don't know what Jesus does in my heart, and I don't know if it has any bearing on the rest of my life. Yeah. I just think it's a really poor metaphor for making a decision to follow Jesus. If you're looking at the Christian life as a life of discipleship, you would not, and say you wanted to be a disciple of Plato, that would not start with asking Plato into your heart. It just doesn't quite make sense. So it's a bad metaphor.
It's bad on so many levels. Everything you said is accurate, but I mean, the closest theologically you could say, like, it's even wrong in a Trinitarian sense, because you don't ask Jesus into your heart. If the closest you get is you could say the Holy Spirit, but that's not exactly accurate. But you got the wrong person of the Trinity in this whole thing. And then all the reasons you said are also accurate, Phil.
But doesn't the Bible tell us to ask Jesus into our hearts?
No.
What's the closest it gets? The closest,
I think, I don't know historically if this is where we got this phrase, but in Revelation, when it talks about Jesus like knocking at the heart of people, which is not about accepting Jesus.
That. Does it?
Yes.
Knocking on the heart?
Knocking at the door?
Knocking at the door.
Yeah,
Does
he's
it
at
say
the
heart?
No, the heart's not there.
Look it up.
I am.
I
we could tell kids to ask Jesus into their livers.
Home.
Just pick an organ.
What
You'll
does it
be
say?
no more or less.
He's just standing at the door and knocking.
Yeah.
The point,
accurate.
Regardless of if it says heart or not, the point is it's also not talking about the moment of conversion or salvation when it's talking about Jesus knocking at the door.
Here it is, Revelations 3:20. Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me.
It's hard to eat in your heart.
Exactly. It's weird. I think maybe the closest might be Romans. If you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord, you'll be saved.
Meld those two together.
But to believe in your heart means the sincerity of belief, right? It's not about...
And you can't do that until the Son of God is living inside your blood pumper.
Yeah, it's the whole thing.
It don't make no sense.
I find it... I want to jump out of my chair when I hear
people say this. So you work with kids. You work with kids.
Yeah.
How do you present like the idea of being a Christian to a kid?
We talk about following Jesus, like you said. I mean, to your point about kids being very literal, there was a kid when we were first doing Curiously Kaitlyn that sent a question in that I don't think we answered. Now I'm like, we really need to do a whole episode on this, where a kid asked, if Jesus is in my heart, does he like taste all the food I eat? Because I really want to eat cake so Jesus can cake.
You're going to clog Jesus in your arteries, kid.
Like very literal response. Yeah. But the other thing we talk a lot about with the kids at my church, partially because this just happened recently. A parent came to me and they were so relieved because their kid had finally prayed the prayer. Mm-hmm. And there was so much angst I think they had about, I think their kid had been asking good questions and like, you know, repeating Bible stories from Sunday school and seemed really curious and engaged. But what they were waiting for that would finally give them like relief that their kid was safe was they asked to pray a prayer and they prayed for Jesus to come in their heart. And we had a great conversation afterwards about like, I don't think you needed to be so worried. I mean, even in that moment they were saying, but did they mean it? I'm not sure. Was it sincere? And I was like, that is not like that kind of fear and angst. That's what happens with kids when we talk a lot about inviting Jesus into your heart too, is like, did I do it right?
Right.
Did it work this time?
Because it's almost an incantation.
Yeah, right. That's exactly what it is.
But it's paired with sincerity. I think it's exactly important. But the like, and it's almost the worst of both worlds though, because there's the incantation, but then it's also, there's so much emphasis on like, did you really mean it? So you can't even feel safe for just having said the words. That's why, I mean, I did this. I know tons of people who did this, where it's like, I prayed the prayer 100 times.
There was a big movement, and it may have started late 19th century, but through the 20th century, particularly in fundamentalist Christianity and then evangelicalism, that you got to get people to sign on the dotted line that evangelism was like sales, you know, and we had become really good at sales as a country. We sold all of our stuff all over the world, and we wanted to sell Jesus all over the world, just like we sold tires and machines and Pepsi and Coke. And so you want to close the sale. And how do you know if you've closed the sale? Did they ask Jesus into their heart? It was a shorthand for a sales process that was ill-conceived from the get-go, because a life of discipleship is not like buying a Pepsi.
I hope kids can get this concept that it's concrete enough, but I think it's better to talk about Jesus as our king and or Jesus as our teacher.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because to submit to a king, to live under the rule of a king, a good king, all that makes more sense. And then that we are learning from Jesus, who's our guide and teacher in life, how to live his way. That makes more sense. Most young kids have teachers of some kind. So those things I think are much better metaphors than this weird invite them into your heart stuff, which is not biblical at all.
I will say, to the credit of evangelicalism, it does sometimes come out of a really good place to say, if you're around a lot of pretty dying, pretty just sort of like nominally Christian cultures and churches and institutions, it made a lot of sense at the time to be like, no, it needs to be that you actually believe this and you've had a conversion experience. And the emphasis on like the exact point that it happens, I think is disastrous and really unhelpful. Yeah. But I don't ever want to like not be thankful for the fact that evangelicalism did say, no, you don't get to just like grow up in the church, not really care, and by osmosis sort of become a Christian. Like you need to actually believe this and actually follow and submit yourself to Jesus.
There's a personal decision,
Yeah.
But it's a personal decision to follow and to learn from, not simply to have a magical indwelling of a person in your
check a box.
Blood pumper.
Dallas Willard talked about it as barcode Christianity, which is you've said the prayer, you've got them in your heart, so when you get scanned after you die, it reads properly so that you get to heaven. But you could take that barcode off and stick it on something else,
and it would work the same.
But it's just that. Yeah.
That's a good.
Okay. Does that help? There, completely revamped children's ministry everywhere now. Actually. Please.
Yeah.
My turn.
And my mother would say the same thing as well. Skye.
His mother's an authority on children's spiritual formation, just so you know.
Yeah.
It's not just, you don't cite your mom to back up your views.
No,
all
my views.
Right.
my mother is there to back me up. Skye.
Okay, this question comes from Peter. Before the election, the Holy Post thought the fear of Project 2025 was overstated. What do they think now?
I was trying to remember. Did we say and I think
somewhere
I think I was trying to give the benefit of the doubt that, okay, it is outside of this administration. It's not Trump saying this is what he's doing. In fact, he's explicitly saying this is not what he's doing. So let's not just call him a liar as a knee-jerk reaction and say, oh no, this is totally what he's doing. He was lying.
Shocker.
Yeah. and I know there've been some like side-by-side comparisons. Here's the policies so far, the executive orders, and here's where you would find that in Project 2025. From what I read, it's pretty tight between the two.
It is. But Kaitlyn, you want to go?
Well, I was just going to say, two things. One, not every scary, horrible thing from Project 2025 has happened. And I think what we said, someone can go back and find all of our exact statements and, get upset at us for it. But what I remember being more concerned about was not saying, hey, hold on, it's not going to be that bad. They're not going to do all those things. What I remember us mostly saying is like, if you are just pumping yourself full of fear and anxiety, you will not be the kind of person who can respond well to this when it actually rubber meets the road of it affecting your actual neighbors. And my concern then is my concern now. I mean, I think before it was a lot of anxiety about what could happen. Now it's a lot of anxiety about constant updates of every horrible thing. I mean, if I get like one more breaking news, Trump administration, ... like it will really make you crazy. And my concern then is my concern now, which is not just that people will get exhausted and like just burnt out from all of it, but also that we talked about this so much in the last election. We talked about it with mostly Republican politicians of like preying on people's fear keeps them from being able to think well, think constructively, do actual work with collaboration. And I think the same is true now, even though it's coming from the other side of the political spectrum, like listening to people who want you to be just like fried all the time with fear. They have an agenda too. And it's not usually just that we'll really collaborate well with each other and have lots of good dialogue and even fight bad political actors and have better outcomes. A lot of times their agenda, if they're trying to keep you fried on fear, is just get you to buy what they're selling, keep you hooked on their cable news program. Like, I still am worried that there are some bad actors that just want us to be stressed and afraid all the time, and it's not good for us.
So you'll be glued to my Substack.
Yeah.
Because I like the idea of a fear fry. Like a fish fry, like a Friday at church. We're going to have a fear fry.
Yeah, we'll
fry you all in fear. So crispy on the outside.
I want to respond to this.
Panic-stricken on the inside.
Peter says that we thought before the election that Project 2025 the fears were overstated. I'm going to double down on that, and I think they're still overstated. And here's why. The Trump administration, or Donald Trump himself, has signed about 140 executive orders at this point. Quite a few of them do align tightly with ideas in Project 2025. And they are doing damage. I'm not saying these are all good things. The difference is an executive order can just as easily be undone by the next president. These are not permanent changes to our government. Now, there is a risk here because by changing a lot of these policies, you're driving really talented and intelligent people out of government, and the brain drain is real. But for example, he signed an executive order to end the Department of Education, but he can't do that without a congressional approval permanently. So those kinds of things, people are getting all stirred up about his executive orders, and they are real and they are having an impact and they do hurt real Americans and people overseas and all these things, but they're not permanent changes. They're temporary. And I think a lot of them are going to be and will be undone. That's number one. Number two, some of the more severe recommendations in Project 2025 that the Trump administration has attempted to do, they've gotten shut down on by the courts, especially like ending birthright citizenship. That was a plan in 2025. He's signing an executive order to do that. The Supreme Court is looking like it's going to say, no way, it's not going to happen. And then thirdly, and people don't talk about this enough, were a number of items in Project 2025 that Donald Trump has actually done the opposite on. And probably the most vivid was Project 2025 wanted to put even further restrictions on abortion, especially the abortion pill. I just recorded a video about this that'll be coming out soon. But the Trump administration has shut down a federal court case that was trying to limit access to abortion pills. He's taken the exact same position as the Biden administration. This is the opposite of what Project 2025 wanted. So the things he has done have gone against Project 2025. The things he's done in conformity with Project 2025 are either being shut down by the courts or they're only executive orders. And as bad as they are, they can be undone. None of them have been legislative. So none of these are laws that are permanent. So yeah, it's a lot of terrible news headlines and freaking people out. It's not a permanent change to the American government. And the things that are terrible hopefully can be undone. I'm not saying it isn't impacting and hurting people now. It's real, but the sky is falling. The government is collapsing. Our Constitution is imploding. Project 25 is, the handbook that's taken the country to hell. I still think it's overblown.
I think people also have to remember that some really scary things always require that norms have changed and some level of public legitimacy is there. And there's a weird way in which some of us who are very critical of things the Trump administration is trying to do or wants to do or has said it will do, weirdly give legitimacy to the Trump administration's ability to do those things by saying, here's what they're going to do. It's going to totally work. I mean, and I think people are trying to emphasize that it's serious to get people to respond, but you have to find a way to do that in a way that doesn't say, they're able to do all that stuff. On some level, we need to maintain just the public norm that no, these are things that are outside of either the executive branch or for whatever other reason, the Trump administration's ability to do.
Yeah, and they are clearly trying to do stuff. I don't think they're competent enough to do much of it. And the stuff they are doing, they're not doing it in a way which leads to permanent change. Yeah. So it can be undone with the stroke of a pen with the next president.
So there you go. Do you, what we've seen roll out, does it make you look back on Wheaton College's congratulations to Russell? And now I'm hearing vaught more than vote. I don't any differently. Should they have? Because it's made me think a little more, learning more about what his positions are actually. Wow, I am no representative of Wheaton College, but I think it may have made sense for them to say, Wheaton College graduate Russell Vaught has been appointed the director of the Office of Budget Management, whatever it is, to the Trump administration. We will be praying for his success and wisdom from God in this very influential role. I think that would be an appropriate
and for
statement.
him not to pursue any of his frighteningly deeply held beliefs.
Well, I don't think you have to say that. I think you say you're praying and hoping that he has God's wisdom
Okay.
Whatever.
Okay. All right. New question. Kaitlyn Chess, right here, folks, live in Wheaton, Illinois.
I'm going to ask an incredibly self-serving question because it was directed towards me and I'm upset about it.
Okay.
But I would love y'all's thoughts on this question as well.
Okay.
Tiffany, who I'm sure you're lovely, Tiffany, says, I have noticed that you do not use male pronouns for God, even though he chooses to use male pronouns for himself in the Bible, even though there are theological and historical reasons to avoid the false belief God is a man or that the male gender more accurately reflects his glory. Isn't it dangerous to refuse the language that is used in the Bible? How would we know when changing the words of Scripture is clarifying truth and when it is changing truth?
Kaitlyn, are you changing Scripture?
Here's the way I wanted to talk about this. One, I use male pronouns for God a lot in my regular life.
I want to hear you do it right now.
God made the whole world and he did it in some amount of time.
Now you're upsetting a whole different constituency.
Not ours.
I was surprised by this question.
So I wanted to talk about this not because I want to tell Tiffany that she's wrong that I don't use male pronouns for God. I think it's an interesting conversation, first of all, but also when I read the question, it prompted me to realize that I do have a tendency to avoid using pronouns for God at all. And it's not because I don't think we should use male pronouns for God. To Tiffany's very true point, God reveals himself in Scripture using masculine pronouns. And I don't think, I both don't think that we have the authority to kind of just change that outright. And I also don't love that some people who want to avoid using male pronouns for God weirdly end up giving more power to the argument that because God uses male pronouns, that means God is a man or men are better. I just want to say those two things are not tied together. You don't have to believe, the second one because you believe the first one. But I do kind of avoid using pronouns for God, partially because sometimes I am in places where it would be frowned upon to use male pronouns for God, even though I disagree. But partially because as I did that to kind of avoid unnecessary offense, to have people hear my point if they would be distracted by my using male pronouns, I've realized that avoiding using pronouns for God does in a weird way help maintain some sense of the otherness of God. Like the awkwardness of your language, I think can actually be a useful exercise to just remind yourself that even though I don't believe using masculine pronouns for God means God is a man, it does sometimes end up sort of seeming that way. And some of us have grown up in churches and cultures where we did sort of act like God is an old man with a big bushy beard in the sky, and also because of that, men are better. And it has been helpful for me to recognize something of the just complete difference of being that God is to avoid using pronouns. And I don't think I've ever used feminine pronouns for God. Not that I think that's heretical, but I think God reveals himself using male pronouns in Scripture, so I use them.
It's a reminder that language is always an accommodation.
Yes.
Right? God uses human language, and then we translate that language into our language. It's always an accommodation that can't fully encapsulate God's eternality and his mystery and all that. So, but yeah, I agree with you. I mean, God reveals himself using male pronouns in the Hebrew and Greek, Old and New Testaments. That's instructive for us, but it doesn't limit him to male gender identity.
Yeah. So. And the same is true of father. Like father tells us a lot, but it doesn't say. I just was at a conference recently where I heard someone say, because God uses father language to describe himself, then that means that like human fathers are God with skin on to their children. And I was mildly horrified because I was like, we have God with skin on, and his name is Jesus.
Who is also male.
Oh, yeah. I mean, true. Not a father, though.
Right. No,
We just don't need to... We don't need to make the jumps that have been made historically, but we also don't have to get rid of the reasons those jumps were made to avoid making those jumps.
Mm-hmm. Right. Does that have something to do with the fact that, the Bible very strongly views God as provider, and in most historic Western family structures, the father was seen more as but that's even more recent because
I think it's more in the ancient Near East. The household structure, there was a patriarchal structure, and the father defined the identity of everyone in that household.
And since God played that role over creation
and over Israel,
it was more natural to think of him as a father.
Right.
And this gets at the last part of Tiffany's question. I mean, I thought this was such a good, important question. How would we know when changing the words of Scripture is clarifying truth and when it is changing truth? You could read that question and go, we should never change the words of Scripture.
Or never translate it.
Right. So, but that's part of, it's a translation question, but it's also a question of, there are some of the trickiest theological questions I think we have to deal with when it comes to interpreting Scripture are, when is this truth that's given here contingent to the time and place it was given, or so couched in the cultural norms of the time and place it was given that it needs to be pretty significantly changed for our time or not. Like one of my mentors and like a pastor friend and a seminary professor of mine who was at this conference recently was saying, there is a direct command in the New Testament that happens multiple times that we just choose to ignore. Greet each other with a holy kiss. Like, how do you know when that's so culturally contingent that we can go, I'm not changing the meaning, but I am changing some of the specifics it comes in. Right. But making the distinction between when that's true and when something else that's in the New Testament that's a direct command, you don't get to say, oh, that was culturally contingent. We don't do that. That's a really hard question.
Yeah. And John Walton, who's been on the show a lot, promotes an idea, particularly when studying the oldest parts of the Bible, that you look for cultural continuities and cultural discontinuities. So, when, for example, in the creation account in Genesis 1, when are the ideas communicated, the exact same ideas you would have seen in other Near East cultures that people would have already been familiar with? And then when do they go against what other creation stories taught? Because it's where they go against the culture that you'll find more the distinctives of what God was doing in the world. And that's complicated because it requires scholarship to figure out, okay, head coverings for women, was that going against the culture in the first century Rome, or was it the culture?
Well, it was kind of both.
A step deeper than that is also from John Walton, is this basic idea that the Bible was written for you, but not to you. It was written to ancient Israelites, or it was written to the church in Thessaloniki, or it was written to the Ephesians or whatever. And so you can't just ignore that fact and directly apply it to yourself. You have to understand, what did the author intend? What did the audience it was intended for recognize in this text? What applies? It's a really complicated, messy, debatable often process. And so I think in a lot of American evangelicalism, we just have this stupid cliche of the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. And no, it doesn't. It's a lot more complicated than that. And so anyway, people don't like those ambiguities, but they're there. And as you mature in your faith and recognize them, it shouldn't cause a crisis. It should cause more curiosity and leaning into these things rather than running away from it.
Okay, my turn. Jordan wants to know, there's been a lot of good conversation about how the church should be thinking about technology, but I haven't heard a lot of thoughts about how we should be thinking about video games. I enjoy making video games, but I'm still trying to think through what it means to follow Jesus as a game developer. I'm not a gamer, so I initially thought, no, I'm not going to pick that. I'm not going to respond to that question. I don't know enough. But I'm kind of gamer adjacent when my kids are gamers and I create media. And I also know that even animators have struggled. Christians who want to go into animation have struggled. Do I need to be making Christian animation? Or can I try to get a job at Pixar? Is it okay if I'm at Pixar just doing the little thing, being the cog in the giant factory of Pixar? Am I doing any good for the kingdom? And beyond in general, if you have a vocation and you're able to provide for yourself and your family, that's a good thing. Beyond that, because we're dealing in industries that promote ideas and behaviors, I think there's a sort of a Hippocratic oath that we can take where we say, above all else, do no harm. So do I think, can a Christian work on video games? Sure. Secular video games? Sure. Should a Christian work on Grand Theft Auto? Oh, that's, and some people would say.
What if you're a police officer in Grand Theft Auto? Like you're working on that.
You are not a police officer.
No, but you're working on that.
Grand Theft Auto. Here's the bottom line for me.
I've never played it.
Yeah.
Poor Kaitlyn. She's just glazing over here like, who cares?
Does not
I have thoughts.
Promote in any way, shape, or form New Kingdom dynamics.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Kind of what I would say.
Okay.
And you say, well, does it have to promote New Kingdom? It should not promote the opposite.
Yeah.
Do no harm.
Yes. It should not. It should not portray evil as good or good as evil.
Amen.
So if you're at a gaming company that makes money promoting good as evil, I would have a hard time staying there.
Yeah.
No, but all video games do that. So where am I supposed to work? Actually, no, it's particular if you're a game designer. Nintendo makes very few games that treat evil as good. Then, their approach, and this is true of a lot of simpler Japanese games, they're just fun. A lot of the Japanese games, you're solving puzzles, you're racing around in a little car. There's lots of gaming you can do that's just fun. Christians,
but the role play kind of story-based gaming stuff can get dark pretty quick.
It can't.
It doesn't have to.
But it doesn't have to. It's. Are you doing Lord of the Rings dark, where it's redemptive dark?
Yeah,
Right.
Where the protagonist is rewarded for, or at least is not rewarded for vice.
Right.
If you're rewarding vice, then I'm not sure I would feel good about participating in that, even if. That doesn't mean you can't portray a broken world.
But I rejoiced when I would shoot a red turtle shell at somebody on Mario Kart and watch them spin out. That was fun.
That's cartoon
There's
violence.
not blood.
There's no glory in blood.
Yeah.
There was glory.
There is glory, but not in blood. It's just knocking someone out of the race with your red turtle shell.
Right. Mm-hmm.
See, and even
it's like a pinball machine.
Or leaving a banana for someone to slip on.
Could you play this game with Jesus?
That's a good question. Would Jesus leave a banana peel for someone to slip on? Because I'm torn. I kind of think maybe yes, maybe no.
In the real world, no. In a game, it's fun.
Yeah.
Nobody does it do harm. and making someone spin out in their little car because you hit them with a red
but the argument
turtle
I'm
shell does no
not
harm.
I'm not disagreeing with you, Phil, but the argument would be, well, if
Better
if I'm murdering people in a video game, that's not actually harming anybody.
And some people have tried to argue that violent video games get that out of us so we don't do it in the real world.
I'm not buying that.
No, I don't think so.
But
I don't think there's also an issue of are we promoting the idea that everyone has dignity and that everyone's life matters?
It sounds like what you're saying is, if you are in a storytelling vocation, whether that's making films, writing books, novels, telling video game stories, if you're in a storytelling vocation, are the stories you're telling consistent with the world that God is creating or wants to create here? Or is it deforming the world?
Yeah.
So
if at all possible, avoid deforming the world with your work. And that's, I think, any kind of work.
I think specifically with video games, there's not just questions to ask about the content. There's also questions to ask about the experience people have and whether it puts any friction in their ability to just do it forever. I'm serious.
You're talking about game or addiction?
Yes. I am more worried about how people, and I don't play video games, so it's very unfair of me to wag a finger, but I do worry not just about, I do worry not just about the content, but about how it forms people. And I would have questions about how much the game requires some kind of community, even if it's not in person.
Yeah.
If it's just you by yourself and there's no friction, and so you could do it forever.
Like Candy Crush.
Yes. Well,
I think Angry Birds is satanic.
I think it's Andy Crouch that has this thing where he's in some way you could make a comparison between video games and games you play in real life. But if you're playing soccer outside with your friends, there is the friction of at some point physically you run out of energy and you can't do it anymore.
I face a lot of friction when I play soccer.
Well, when you play video games, at some point you have to go to the bathroom.
It's much longer.
But you can take it with you, Phil.
And you can take it with you. And so that's what I would worry about too.
But Kaitlyn, that if you're a game designer, you actually have some ability to speak into that.
That's what I'm saying. You should.
If you're, most of the people who work at game companies have no ability to speak.
Yeah, they're not designing the games.
Run a resistance. Do something.
You can advocate. Yeah, and that's the question. Do you advocate for something better from within an organization? If you work at Disney and they want you to do marketing on a movie that you really don't like, do you refuse to do marketing and now you don't work at Disney anymore because this guy's really difficult? Or are you a voice of, can we present this in a way or can I migrate over to these films over here?
Well, this is why it's also really hard too, is that there's economic incentive to not make those changes.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. So I don't know if that helps at all. Above all else, do no harm. And
don't fry your brain.
If you're a designer, there are a lot of games secular games that actually have new creation dynamics in them, where you're building, where you're creating, where you're growing, where you're nurturing, not just where you're constantly destroying as a form of pleasure.
Can a Christian work at a casino in Vegas?
No.
Kaitlyn says no.
Okay. I'm just there's endless questions here about where.
Yeah, right. I know. We can go on with this.
No.
Could you be a housekeeper at a hotel casino in Vegas?
I said that too broadly.
Yeah, you
but
did. You did,
I think you should ask some questions about it.
Could you be a cook at a
Probably, yeah.
Should
you be the dealer?
At an all-you-can-eat buffet that encourages gluttony.
Right.
At a casino
You're right
in
that
Vegas.
You could go for this is where
How far
you need
removed?
discernment and community and listen to the Holy Spirit. But I do think most Americans do not ask at all the question, am I participating in something that harms other people?
Well,
we just kind of go, that's not my job to care about.
Someone asked these questions of us recently in a political discussion, but we are all participating in systems that are dehumanizing and ungodly. The question is how intimately connected are we to the outcome of that? The fact that, I don't know if we all have retirement accounts, we probably all have money sitting in a bank somewhere and that bank is investing that money in things that we have no idea. Yeah. So are we participating in an evil system? Yes, we are. This was the challenge that Jesus had when they asked him, should we pay taxes to Caesar, right? So you can't argue for complete separation.
Well, yeah, because at some point, the person working at Target
Right.
could be morally
Right.
culpable
Right.
because they sell Grand Theft Auto and are
Bingo.
Yeah.
But then there's big differences between that and I think I've talked on the show before about the short film The Ordinance about a bunch of churches that advocated to put restrictions on payday loan places in Texas. And part of the conversation that happened there was that there were people in these churches that owned payday loan places. And their pastors felt like it was pretty important to actually say, like, we don't think you should. And it doesn't mean there's a clear line between the safe jobs and the not safe jobs. But I just appreciate that someone at some point asks, like, is this good for your soul? And is it good for other people?
Okay, Jeremy, that's my son.
Am I that much younger than you, Phil?
From Skye, you got another one?
I do. Britta asks, what theological issue are North American Christians paying too much attention to? And what theological issue are they not paying enough attention to?
Which North American Christians do you have?
That's a very good
not a monolith,
question.
is it?
Yeah. You have an answer.
Yeah,
I have a thought.
Yeah,
go. You like the question. You give an answer.
I think we spend way too much energy focusing on heaven and hell.
Shocker.
I know, even though I just wrote 2 books about these very questions. And when I say heaven and hell, I mean what happens to you immediately after death. And I'm not saying these are not legitimate questions or theologically important or biblical in some way, but I think we spend too much energy on them because they are not the emphasis of the New Testament. The goal of our faith is not where do you go when you die. It's, as we said earlier, it's by having Jesus as your king and learning to follow him as your teacher and learning to live your life in his way of living. So what we don't focus enough on is actual communion with Christ today and learning to live from him in the present because we're too focused on, well, what's my address going to be when I'm dead? I could go on. I have other ones. I think there's no way too much time on the rapture and eschatology.
I thought you were going to go to crotch Christianity.
I thought that's what you were going to say too, and I was going to fight you.
Phil.
Sorry.
I agree with that too. That's another one. But
I
think more people are focused on the heaven and hell question than these other things.
Kaitlyn, you got one?
I mean, I agree with Skye. I just have been working on a Curiously Kaitlyn episode where I asked a bunch of kids, what is heaven like? And I asked heaven because I first started asking them, what is new creation like? Which is more what I was curious about. And they had they don't know. But when I said, what is heaven like? They had lots of thoughts that I do actually think they mean eternity, but they're confused. That's just the general term we have for that. I think we spent, this is a vague answer, but I think we spend a lot of time right now on specific questions that are really nuanced divisions between denominations, at least in the online Christian world that fights about theological things. And yet so many people in our churches do not have basic, to your point earlier, Trinitarian understandings. I don't think I knew what the Trinity was until I went to seminary. I couldn't tell you what I would have said it was or how I would have described it before I got the language I got in seminary.
Or which gender.
It's like a clover.
Or which gender. An egg or the states of water. It's just shocking to me. The fact that things that were not only so, they're not only so logically foundational to Christianity, but the early church worked so hard to come up with, these are the things that we can say. Here's how we're taking all the scriptural language and fitting it together. And here's all the things we've decided are heretical. And we fought and killed people over it. And it was so important. And now we just get to receive those gifts of really rich, beautiful theology about who God is and how he made creation. And we just don't even know it. We get to receive these beautiful gifts and we're fighting about things that I think are really important. But I think most people in churches have more to say about whether they baptize babies or not, which I care a lot about. But they really maybe couldn't tell you what the Trinity is or who Jesus is, how Jesus can be God and human. Those basic foundational things we're not.
It feels to me like, imagine people getting in heated, really nasty arguments, splitting up families and friendships over whether or not a basketball defense is better in zone or man on man. When these same, know what that means. When these same people don't even know how many points you get for a layup. They don't know the basics of basketball, but they're willing to fight to the death over zone or man on man. That's a bit like women's ordination, but they have no idea what the Trinity is. That's what boggles my mind too, is that so many people lack the basic understandings of our faith, but they will fight over minutia doctrines that I'm not saying they don't matter, but they're not you're putting the cart before the horse.
We talked about the Nicene Creed last week. And if you don't have in your head the fundamentals as represented in the Nicene Creed, but you spend a lot of time thinking about, whether it's transgender and trying to figure that, fit that into the Bible, like all the hot button issues of today. If your theology leaps from hot button to hot button, but never has a foundation under it, you're really on shaky ground. So there you go. Too many hot buttons, not enough. Would we say meat and potatoes anymore? Or would we not say that because people are either trying to be low carbs or they don't eat red meat anymore?
That could be, Beyond Meat.
Okay.
And cauliflower potatoes.
All we want is flaming hot Cheetos. It's like, what is the thing, the cool thing that's just going to light up my tongue?
Right.
The Takis.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh, I do love Takis.
So we like Takis.
We can do that show where they do the hot wings while being interviewed.
We should do that.
We'd have to have our own version.
Yeah.
Okay, we can do maybe one more. Kaitlyn, do you have one more?
Yeah. And I don't know how you'll feel about this.
Uh-oh.
Connie asks, you guys are always talking about how we need to be part of a church community, but everything in me says it's a bad idea to make myself vulnerable and get involved again. How do I move past this?
I highlighted that one too.
Did you? Okay, what do you think, Phil?
It's really hard. I would say that Connie has some bad experience in her past.
Yeah, probably.
She has some church trauma, and I know a lot of people with church trauma. In fact, my little church community right now is made almost entirely of people with church trauma, which is why we're all together and not in the walls of a formal church building. It is really hard to speak to that without knowing her specifics.
Yeah.
Because there are instances where I'd say, you know what, you really need to take more time away. And I don't know that. What worked? Now, we formed a community out of kind of an explosion in a church that deeply wounded quite a few people. And so, but we didn't want to see them just all drift away, into isolation. So one of the things we did was saying, well, let's just get together, spend some time together. We won't call it church. We won't use any of the words that would say this is a church service.
Yeah.
We're just going to get together. We're going to talk. We're going to share. We'll pray a little. We may open the Bible a little, and then we're going to have communion. And then that's it. And that has really worked. It's been tricky as different people that had different levels of church hurt. Some were ready to go back into a formal church structure before others. But so it's kind of a spiritual or ecclesial rehab. It's like, how long do you need to be in an alternate community? And I don't think there's any scenario where someone who's had a trauma is better off just being by themselves.
Yeah.
The question is what you do need community. The question is what kind of community.
I think that's the right question. Yeah. It's well, a lot of times when we think about church, we think about the formal structure, right? There's a building, there's a worship service, there's staff or pastors or whatever. And yet the smallest expression of the church, where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am in the midst of them. So if you're not able to find yourself in a large worshiping church community, who are the 2 or 3 that you can start with, that you have built trust with, that represent the love of God in your life and you to them? Start there.
Yeah.
And whatever amount of time that is required to heal more and open that circle up to more people, don't rush it.
I would just say we had a great conversation about this at the Holy Post live event that we did in Virginia last weekend with Duke Kwan. And one of the things we talked about was something I've been thinking about a lot lately because of my own church situation. I'm in such a healthy, really vibrant, flourishing church right now. And I came to it fresh off of a really horrific church situation. And what I've realized being in such a beautiful community, it is so much safer. Like there are some real safeguards of like, I trust the integrity of the people in charge. And I think we have, I'm biased, like I'm Presbyterian. I think our polity is good, but like I enjoy being in a church where I think there are some safeguards against some of the things that particularly happened to me. But I've also realized, to Connie, your question about making yourself vulnerable, it's like whether it's toxic or whether it's really beautiful, either way, being really close to a community of people is a risky thing. It is just always going to present some risk. And what I'm experiencing right now is like, I love this church so much. Even though it's not toxic, I'm not having a bad experience at all, there's always the risk of like, I move away and like, I'm not with you. And that's painful. And it's not the same kind of pain as being really harmed in a church. It's not to say, oh, it's all the same, so you should endure one or the other. One should really be seriously dealt with. But I've just been struck so much recently with like the joy and the risk of being very close to other humans in any capacity, but especially in the church where we don't just say we like hanging out with each other, but we belong to one another. By the death and resurrection of Christ, we have been bound together. There will always be risk involved in that. And you should take time to heal, and you should try and find a church that is really healthy. But the idea that you could ever end up in a situation where you are deeply embedded in other people's lives and there's no risk is not something that's possible.
Totally.
So Connie, I think the question is, what kind of community would work for you right now? And start there. And that may be 4 people in your living room, that you really trust, that also had a church experience that drove them away from a formal church. And how long do you need that? As long as you need that, until it becomes something that you discover you're kind of stuck in, and you expand your community as you start to rebuild the ability to trust and recover from trauma. And that's all I got to say about that. We have one more question.
We do. We have one more question.
Skye's going to read it, last question.
Before I read this question, let me just preface it by saying this is not from a random listener. This is someone whom we know.
Okay, so it's not a stalker.
It's not a stalker.
That's good. Good to know.
And it's a question for Kaitlyn.
From not a stalker.
Correct.
From someone I know.
Just establishing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know this person.
Dear Kaitlyn, I've been listening to the podcast for a long time and always respected your thoughtful engagement with culture from a Christ-centered lens.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Around September of last year, I came to see you speak on politics and the church, and I was immediately enamored by your kindness, wisdom, and graciousness to people seeking to love God and do good in the world. I'm your biggest fan.
Oh, wow.
I believe you can do anything.
Oh.
I think your heart and mind are beautiful, and I am in love with you. So I want to ask you, will you move to the Midwest so we can read and pray and laugh and walk hand in hand together? Let me know. Signed, Noah. P.S. If you say yes, I promise I'll pronounce Augustine the right way. Does he say Augustine?
He did when we met on our first date, and I was like, that's got to change.
Honey, you got some splaining to do.
Wait, did you say date?
Yeah. Well, first I should answer Noah's question, which is, will I move to the Midwest? And the answer is yes.
What?
Yes!
Big news.
I'm going to move here.
So you can be in studio with us
So
all
I
the
can
time.
be in, I did it for you.
Clearly.
I told Noah it was for him, but I really did it for you guys.
I hope he doesn't listen to this. That would be embarrassing.
No, that's not true. I did it for him. I like you guys a lot, but I love
How long
him.
have you and Noah been dating?
Okay, we're not taking additional questions.
How long have you been dating?
Well, we're going to get bombarded with
We've
them
been
all
dating.
I
time.
wouldn't want to think you would like meet a guy.
No.
This didn't happen last week, right?
No.
He heard
He
you
said
speak.
September.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
he did?
He said
Okay.
he
said
came to
September.
hear you
September.
speak in September.
Yeah.
And
Okay, so that's been a while.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good.
So that's a good opportunity for me to say, though, I'm sharing this, and we're accepting no other questions.
wow.
Yeah.
So back off, everybody. Don't pry.
Okay.
But yeah,
Well,
I'm
if
going to
I-
be in the studio from
If
now on.
I had my ukulele,
What would you do?
I would sing a special song
Aw,
for you.
That's so nice. What
Yeah.
would it be about?
Augustine
Well, I think
or
we know what it
Augustine?
would be about. I think we know
Oh.
about your upcoming move.
Yeah.
And, the global church's excitement about your upcoming move. I think it's fair to say that evangelicals everywhere,
Are overjoyed.
yeah, they're coming together in song. They want to sing a new song about Kaitlyn moving. and
Well,
I need to write it.
In all seriousness, no. Obviously, you're moving in part because of this, a significant part because of this relationship, and we're excited for you and happy for you and Noah and all
Would
that.
you say it's like 50-50?
So sorry, no.
But I am grateful because we are the beneficiaries of this. So we are going to love having you around more and be able to collaborate more and do more Holy Post events here in the Chicago
whole
area.
team together.
Exactly. So I'm super happy about that part.
Yeah.
Such fun. Such fun. Well, that's our show for this week. What will next week bring? We have no idea. You just don't know. Maybe we should do, because I'm thinking about the Nicene Creed and how even we are often attracted to the flaming hot Cheetos of theology because they pop up on social media and it's like, well, that's fun to talk about. I just wonder if we should do a series on the basics.
Oh.
Caitlin and I have actually been giving some talk about this.
Oh.
I think we're going
If only you weren't so far apart
I
geographically.
know. Well, this is, again, one of the benefits of her coming to Wheaton because I don't know if we should say anything, but we are in the very, very early discussion about creating a sort of Holy Post catechism.
You just said something.
I know. It's very early, though.
That was it.
First it's Skye's new book that everyone needs to read at Holy Post Plus. And then, we're talking.
Puppets?
Would you like there to be puppets?
I don't.
What was that face for, Kaitlyn?
Totally. I'm so into puppets.
What do you have against puppets? Okay. They do have an impact on people because Skye grew up around puppets. Were formative in his... Well, your wife definitely grew up around
She's half
puppets.
puppet, actually.
And the show Righteous Gemstones?
Yes.
Yeah, which is a parody of televangelists and megachurch HBO, fairly crass. The guy who created it, his mother ran the puppet ministry at his SBC church.
They must be so proud.
Right.
So puppets seem to stick with people in a variety of ways, for better or for worse. Christian puppets leave a mark. Okay, thanks. We don't have a guest. This is it. We're done. We don't have a guest. So you don't have to listen to anything else. You can go now, or you can acknowledge that maybe you always went now and you never listened to the guests. That's okay. I don't mind. That's okay. But we'll see you next week. Bye.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Strelo, editing by Seth Gorvet. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much, much more.